Waiting for a couple of extra people to join us before we kick off. So it won't be long now before we are ready to go live with our latest webinar. If you'll just stand by for a few minutes. Thank you. And I believe our Facebook viewers may have just joined us. So welcome to the Internet Association of Australia's latest webinar, Life Under Lockdown, How Good is Our Internet? We're just waiting for a few minutes for a couple of extra people to join us, and then we'll be kicking off with the webinar. Thank you. So stand by. Okay. Welcome everybody to our latest webinar, Life Under Lockdown, How Good is Our Internet? My name is Narelle Clark. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Internet Association of Australia, known to you all, I hope, as the operators of IX Australia, what we think is Australia's best internet exchange across the country. Now, tonight we've got this afternoon, this morning, we've got a really interesting session for you to look at how good is Australia's broadband. We've got three great speakers. First of all, we have Sean Riordon, who is the General Manager of Communications Markets and Advocacy with the ACCC. So wave at us, please, Sean. He'll also be joined by Sam Crawford, who is the founder and CTO of SamKnows, and Roxanne Robinson, who is the Director of Government Projects with SamKnows. So first of all, let me tell you that Sean has been working on infrastructure markets and communications markets in particular for the better part of 20 years. Sean leads a team at the ACCC that aims to boost competition and protection and protect consumer interests as the communications sector undergoes a period of significant structural and market change. It does this via market inquiries and reviews, implementing compliance and engagement strategies to resolve significant market failure, and investigating allegations of anti-competitive conduct and contraventions of the Australian Consumer Law, known to us all in its more familiar acronym, the ACL. Sean will speak to the rationale for implementing the Measuring Broadband Australia program as a means to address market failure, facilitate competition, and encourage good selling practices. So that's a bit about Sean. But I've just realised, of course, that I've failed to do the appropriate thing, and that is go through my introduction slides that my staff have wonderfully prepared for me here. So yes, here we are. A couple of housekeeping points I need to mention. Now, I expect you're all in your homes or offices, so you know where the exits are. And if your emergency alarms go off, we'll just put you on mute. Please just exit the building and assemble appropriately, dealing with whatever emergency you have to deal with. A feedback survey will be sent out tonight. We'll be asking you if there are any improvements that you might have for our sessions, if there are any future topics that you'd like to hear. Please, definitely, folks, tell us about any future topics that you'd like to hear about. They could be things like demos from our members or presentations that members yourselves have got in mind to tell us about your networks, your systems, or some interesting, neat hack that you've come up with. Also, we're keen to hear if this is the best time slot for you. This is a good time slot for some people in some places, and it does allow us to beam in people from Europe in their morning hours. But of course, if you ever want us to have a guest in from North America or somebody who has to go and pick up kids from school, this might not be the most convenient time. So please let us know about that. Or if you want us to have some peering socials, like a lot of other internet exchanges do have, we can certainly run some of those in. We are going to have some social time this evening after the formal part of the presentation is over, where we will promote all of our attendees to presenters again, and we'll be all able to chat and socialise more freely. So yeah, let us know what you want to do. Our speakers, I've already introduced Sean Riordon. Sam is the founder and CTO of SamKnows. So he leads the technical efforts at SamKnows and sets the direction for future development work. He works closely with third parties such as Netflix and YouTube and negotiates access to their platforms to conduct measurements and agree test methodologies with them. He also liaises with respected academics from universities globally and has co-authored a number of academic papers on network measurements. Sam also works very closely with key technologists at ISPs, regulators and content providers, ensuring our measurement methodologies accurately reflect user experience and our reporting is both relevant and understandable. Recent work has focused on the design of a comprehensive suite of in-home measurements and an AI-based network monitoring tool. That should be fascinating to hear about, I'm sure. And Roxanne Robinson is the Director of Government Projects at SamKnows. Roxanne leads the government team at SamKnows, and during her 7 years at the company, she's worked with regulators in over 37 countries, implementing a range of SamKnows products, rolling out both fixed line studies using the SamKnows White Box or SamKnows SDK and mobile broadband projects. She's provided a deep knowledge of the practicalities of running projects as well as an understanding of the major goals and challenges that regulators face. Roxanne makes strategic insights using the vast amounts of data collected to help improve broadband provision in country, benchmark operators, as well as providing data that helps audit coverage maps and provide vital information on connectivity after disaster events. That must be just fascinating, Roxanne. I'm really keen to hear about it. Okay, a couple of things I want to mention about in the future. In October, we've got our AGM. And I'm also announcing here for the first time too that we've got Jari Arko coming to join us. Jari is, his job title is Expert on Internet Architecture, works for Ericsson Research, and he's also a former IETF chair and a member of the Internet Architecture Board. So I'm sure you'll be all thrilled to hear Jari when he comes to speak for us. And of course in November, we're planning for some anniversary celebrations for our 25th anniversary. And that's a time that we must surely mark, and dates to be confirmed around that. We won't miss it. We're just sort of waiting for the practicalities for getting between states and having numbers of people together in different places to work on that one. Okay, so what I need to do now is to hand over to Sean, and Sean will continue the presentation from his desktop. So over to you, Sean.
Okay, thanks very much, Narelle. I'm just bringing up presentation. Hopefully you can all see that. I think it's a customary question I have to ask at the start.
That's the one. If you could go full screen, that would be great, Sean.
Okay, yep. Yeah, so is that better?
That's great, Sean. Go ahead.
Right, okay. Yeah, so thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you today, and very much.
Sorry, Sean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your preview slide from PowerPoint has now encroached over the main display screen. If you could move that off to the left a bit further, that would be great. Yeah, now we see what we'd like to see. Thank you.
Great, yeah, okay. Thank you. So look, I'll give you a very brief overview of the ACCC's role in the communication sector. It'll be very brief. It's to very much explain the rationale for the broadband monitoring program that we are running, and very much looking to illustrate why the ACCC is involved so much in this particular issue. When you think about regulation, I think many people here would think about the ACMA technical regulation, which is probably at the forefront of your day-to-day work. Or if you thought about the ACCC, you would be thinking about ACL, as the rel's called out, or some of the competition rules which the ACCC administers around cartels or mergers that reduce competition. They're all very important, and they do touch quite often upon the communication sector. But in addition to that, since 1997, the ACCC has been the economic regulator of this sector, and it has quite a broad mandate, and it's very much looking to promote the long-term interests of end users. So we want to boost competition, get any-to-any connectivity, so reduce network effects, and we want to encourage efficient investment and use of the infrastructure. And we always try and do that through promoting more competitive markets, because that's the best way, the most proven way to ensure that markets work well for both service providers and, but importantly, for consumers. That if we have competition, then there'll be a broader range of products and services from which consumers can select and which will represent good value for them. That said, there are some structural issues that sometimes emerge in communication markets, mostly around fixed access and transmission routes, or some transmission routes, which weaken the potential for effective competition to emerge, and they're the areas where we get more involved. Broadly speaking, in those situations, we can do a few different things. Some of those things are fairly direct interventions in the commercial supply arrangements, but also there's a competition framework that exists just for the telco sector. And importantly for this presentation, one of the key aspects of that is collecting information and making it available into the market, because information asymmetry can be itself a barrier to entry and a barrier to markets working efficiently. So that brings us to the rationale for broadband performance monitoring. Very much the situation was, when we first started to think about this, you have to go back 6 or 7 years when the idea first came as something that was of potential interest to us. And it was at the time when NBN Co was developing up its commercial offers, its product descriptions. And it became clear that all the investment in the NBN to make available higher speeds and better quality broadband was going to be implemented through a commercial model that was very much tiered. So there was going to be a range of differentiated products that would be keyed off busy hour speeds and maximum speeds. And that would be how the product differentiation would occur. And so we'd have a range of retail products at different prices, but very much where speed was going to be the determining factor. So any retail service providers in the room would know this very well. It was implemented through an AVC, or access virtual circuit, and connectivity virtual circuit product construct, both of which were selectable by the RSP to meet the consumer requirements and through offering different quality retail plans. Whilst this was all great news for consumers that they would have access to better quality, it did raise some challenges for them. And the first one was they didn't have a lot of experience in how to select plans. Is 12 megabits better than 1 gigabit, or what will they need for their particular household? There was also a migration model, which meant that consumers had to make a choice if they wanted to select, so if they wanted to stay connected, and so they had to select an option. They didn't have a do nothing option. And this did lead to some consumer confusion. So there were a series of articles, if you remember, that became more prominent and more critical as the time went on. And this is one statement from 2017, where there was a range of consumers who quite reasonably, I suppose, had possibly had an experience in migrating to the NBN, where for them it didn't quite work, and it was anecdotal stories like these that were starting to inform the public opinion of the NBN program, and was also starting to weigh on the market. So you might be wondering what the ACCC was doing over this time frame. So there were probably 4 discrete aspects of our work. The first we started in 2015, and I'll probably just go to the slides on each of these and explain what we were doing at each stage. So in 2015, we ran a pilot program because we found you need evidence in order to illustrate the nature of a problem and start to be able to scope out solutions with people. So in 2015, the pilot program allowed us to monitor what was happening on ADSL and HFC services. This particular figure is taken from a report that we published concerning the pilot. It's a 1-week period, and it shows there the red line is the HFC products that were in test, and the aqua line was the products that are supplied out of ADSL that were in test. And there's a regular sort of heartbeat there, if you would like to call it that, where in the busy hours the speeds were dropping quite significantly, especially on the cable product. ADSL, the same was present, but over a smaller scale. We also had a small number of early release NBN plans in test. And you can see there are a variety of experiences. The 25-speed product that we had was very consistent. One of the 50 products was also very consistent. Another 50 product, though, you can see that it's a green line, it drops quite a bit. And the 100 product, this particular service that we were monitoring, each evening it would drop substantially, and it would drop below the speeds that we were seeing for the other plans on offer, even though it was being sold as at a premium price with the premium speed. So from that position, we then went into, well, how do we try and solve for this problem? We could see that there were difficulties that the market was going to present if people couldn't discern what the quality of the product was before they purchased, and they could only identify that pre-purchase based upon the off-peak speed, because by definition, consumers will be much more interested in how the product's going to be performing at the time that they're most likely to use it, which is during the peak periods. So as we normally do, we go up and speak to a lot of people. We spoke to consumer groups, we spoke to service providers, network operators, and that led to us, when we were confident enough, when we thought we knew what the solutions were likely to be, we went out and tested that through a discussion paper. That was July 2016, and the key insights for us was that the main safeguard against poor NBN experience in terms of quality and speed was going to be through RSPs, firstly being more open with their customers about what they should come to expect. So by standing up and saying, this is what we think we can deliver to you if you choose this plan, including the busy hour, that would both give consumers a more informed decision to make, and it would also provide a benchmark that RSPs were happy to stand behind and live up to. And if they weren't going to meet that, then they would take the necessary steps to try and improve their performance. The consultation ended up with 6 principles, which are there in the slide pack. I might just leave that there, very much focusing on information coming into market through RSPs who have the loudest voice in the market about what people should expect in the busy period. Over the same period, so about 2017, we were also working on scoping out a broadband performance and monitoring program. The benefits that we saw from the program as part of this overall package of measures was that we could see that there was going to also be a need for credible market data at both the network and retail level to give public confidence in the speed claims that retailers would be making, and so ultimately solving the market failure that we were seeing stemming back from a lack of information on NBN speeds. And so the Measuring Broadband Australia program was announced in April 2017. And over the course of the year, we set up our systems to take expressions of interest from volunteers, as this program relies on the generosity of individuals, very much so. So if there's anybody here who is a volunteer in our program, very sincere thanks to you for the generosity that you've shown to us and the assistance you've given to allow the program to run. There were a few nervous weeks for us because after we set up the program and had done all this work, we still had to, there still is uncertainty about whether people were volunteering or whether it was something that was something that they were concerned about, but they weren't going to take steps to help us in this novel sort of program. But we're very heartened that there were over 5,000 volunteers nominating in the first few months from us opening the volunteer portal. And by late 2017, we had appointed a testing service provider after a very competitive tender process. And you'll hear from SamKnows shortly, who was the appointed service provider. And the first MBA report was published in March 2018. Very much the objective, again, promoting competition and consumer outcomes through transparency. And we have also tried to pick out some particular themes to emphasise in our reports. So I'll just give you a sense of the sort of data and results that we see through the program. Since the first report, we have introduced additional metrics. We present them through reports that SamKnows prepares for us, they're PDFs, but we also take out the data series and we put them in an interactive display on our website. So these are screenshots from the interactive data display. Just give you a sense of it, but you can go to our website and see these and interrogate the data as well to get additional insights that you're interested in. The key metrics we report on are download and upload speeds and other quality attributes such as latency, packet loss, and outages. And we now have 9 reports in total, so there's a good depth of data that's there for people who are interested in seeing how things have tracked over time. So those themes that we've investigated, probably the first one, probably the one I'll talk to a little bit here, is the impact of poor NBN connections. So very much from the first report, we saw that there were a majority of services which were achieving very good outcomes, much better than what we had anticipated and what you would have been led to expect from the press coverage that had preceded the program, but there was a material subset of services which were achieving lower speeds. And the difficulty that we had with that we could see with that is that unless that was overcome, unless there was some way in which the consumer could be put on plans that better matched the capability of the lines, that there'd be this ongoing dissatisfaction from the consumer who, in two ways, could not achieve the speeds that they want through their product selection, plus were paying a higher price than what they would otherwise have paid for the speeds that they were going to achieve in practice. So over the course of the MBA program, we've continued to differentiate results and try and present them in a way which illustrates the extent to which this is happening and the improvements that could be realised if that particular issue could be solved for. There's a number of other themes that we've explored over the course of the program, but I think Sam and Roxanne are going to talk to those, so I'll just pass over that for now. But the main issue that we have pursued over the course of the program is busy hour speed. And if you think back to the figures that we presented from the 2015 pilot, this is quite a similar view, but taken from May 2020. And this is a view of average speeds by hours a day and by NBN speed tier. And you'll see, and this is over the course of a test month. So, for example, the 8 PM results will be an average of the download speeds observed for all of the NBN services in test over that month, taken between 8 and 9 PM. So you'll see that there is some slight dip still in the 100 tier. It's coming down to the mid-80s. But very much not dropping below, very significantly below the speeds in the off-peak time. And there's no crossover, so people on 100 speed, so the 100 speed plans are operating at a much higher level than the 50, a much higher level than the 25s. And the baseline figure there of the series there is ADSL to compare to what we're seeing on ADSL products that were in test. So in 2018, we ran that, and that was a key finding that we made in our effectiveness review. We did something similar and saw that this issue that had been present back in 2015 had largely been, had been overcome, but there was now much more stability in off-peak, in-peak speeds on NBN plans. But we saw a number of other changes in the market that had happened. And a lot of these changes, that they didn't come only through the retail market. So it's not as though we were publishing these retail level results on RSPs or just the wholesale level results as well on the NBN. And that was what was solving it. There were other changes that were happening at the time in the wholesale market both what was happening in the wholesale and retail markets was very significant. So if in September 2017 on this in this table, you'll see that there are very few higher speed products on the NBN being acquired by consumers. But by June 2018, which is after two of our reports and after the after RSPs had swapped over to emphasising the speeds that were available in the busy hours on their plans, we saw that there was a very large shift towards the 50/20 speed tier over the entry-level speed tiers, and that's continued today. And the average CVC acquired per AVC, you'll see that very large jump in December 2017. and that was through a change in the wholesale market, which the commercial terms made that economic for people to shift up their CVC acquisitions very substantially, which was another very positive change in the markets. And this chart shows NBN codes measurements of busy hour congestion on their CVCs, so how they measure that. So an independent measure separate to the MBA program, but just showing the way in which the market was now delivering on consumer demand much more reliably. So when we started in getting the MBA program together, this hours of congestion were like 7.5 hours of congestion per service per week. So practically 2 hours each. Practically over an hour a day, now down to half an hour over the course of a week. So again, a very good sign that the market was better delivering on demand when the congestion levels had fallen to such an extent. And just before I hand over to Sam and Roxanne, that's your 5-minute warning. Looking ahead, there's one thing I could impress upon you, it's that we're always looking to improve. If there are things we can do differently in how we run the MBA program, or what it is that we focus on and look to measure, and how we could present those measures. We're always interested in hearing from people and getting their feedback on what we should be doing better. There's possibly 3 things that we would like to do as a team to make the MBA program to maintain its relevance. One, we're very much looking to add the new very high speed tiers that NBN is facilitating. And so we'd be looking for volunteers and build up a customer cohort for those products. Fixed wireless was something that we thought we would not be looking at, but the fixed wireless products that are coming onto market now, they appear to be, and the NBN products themselves, there's a lot of investment going into those networks, and the products are probably quite well suited now to being measured through a program like this. And we're always looking to benchmark the NBN against equivalent networks, although the footprint of those networks is necessarily a lot narrower than the NBN, and it's fewer people, fewer volunteers, potential volunteers to get onto the program. So we're always looking to partner with people who could assist us in building those particular volunteer cohorts, so we can get a good view over those other networks. Again, just to give the public, consumers, a way to assess the relative values of the NBN to them. So if you have any ideas on that, there is an email address which you can use to reach out to us.
Oh, thank you for that, Sean.
Yeah, great. My setup here isn't brilliant, and for a while there I was thinking I was flying blind, and the network might have dropped down or something. So I was very, very reassured there, Neville, that you took over. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Sean. It's really interesting to see that variation in performance across the period of the days in the early days of your measurement there. I thought that was absolutely incredible. And I'm wondering too, have you seen any changes in the ratio of CVC to AVC, the average ratio there since the NBN Co started offering that free uplift? Well,
yes, yeah. Well, if there's any RSPs in the room, they may dispute the word free, but there's the change in the product construct and the short-term discounting that happened from December 2017. So that was that 38% boost. That really reset the market. Since then, the CBC growth has continued, and there is a data set for those of you that are interested that's on our website. We can point you in that direction. It's refreshed every 3 months, but yes, it has continued to grow as consumers have decided, the consumer needs have continued to grow. There was an uptick with during COVID. NBN was making available a rebate, a special rebate for the.
They still are.
Yeah, that's right, and that's now going till November,
and hopefully longer if we still have a COVID. Yes, anyway.
Yep. No, you're right. The can's been kicked a few times, and I know that it's very much a very topical interest for RSPs as to what comes next. And pricing certainty, I think, is one of those things in the wholesale market that is also contributing a lot as the commercial offers in the wholesale market become more certain. That's been a big boost as well for the service quality over the NBN.
Sure. Okay. Well, look, I note that we did decide to shift this so that we'd take questions from people generally at the end of the presentation. So if there are people out there with questions for Sean, I wonder if you could just hang on to those questions until we just hear from the SamKnows folks, and then we'll bring it all together at the end if that's okay. So feel free to post those questions into the chat channel or the Q&A channel, particularly, so that we can pick them up at the end of the next session. So if I'll hand over now to Roxanne Robinson, the Director of Government Projects with SamKnows. Once again, thank you for agreeing to join us in your bright early English morning.
Yes, sunny English morning here.
Okay, so over to you, Roxanne, then if you share your screen.
No problem at all. So I'm just sharing the screen now. So just to check, can you guys see that?
Yes, I see it. Hopefully everybody else can too.
I'll take the silence as a yes. Oh, hang on. I might just stop my video because ironically my internet in my house is not very good. For an internet measurement company, you would have thought I'd have been able to sort that out by now. So first of all, I just wanted to say a good afternoon to all of you guys. I wanted to thank the Internet Association Australia for extending the invite to us via the ACCC and for allowing us to talk through our experience on working with the ACCC on the Measuring Broadband Australia project. Sean's already talked through, why the project was set up and the kind of the aims and goals of the ACCC. And from our perspective, I'd like to give a brief introduction just to who SamKnows is for those on the call that don't know, and a little background into what we do, as well as talking a little bit more about how the platform itself works and how the testing methodology is set up, just to give a bit of background and context into what actual testing we run on the program and a bit more technical insight into how that works. So I will run through the first part of the presentation and then I will be handing over to Sam. And as Narelle mentioned at the beginning of the call, Sam's one of the founders and the CTO here at SamKnows. He is indeed the Sam of SamKnows, and I don't think he regrets naming the company after himself, but he does get quite a few jokes about that. So moving on to screen or slide 2. Bear with me. Can you guys see my slide 2 here?
No, not yet, Roxanne. I'm just seeing the blue SamKnows screen.
Bear with me. Let's see what's happening. Share.
I can share from my side if you need to.
It doesn't seem to be working for me, but bear with me for 1 second. It might just be my computer having a bit of a moment. Oh, there we go. Can you guys see that?
I'm still seeing the blue SamKnows title page.
Oh, it's changed for me. Hold on. Let me just try playing again. Can you guys see that now?
I'm still seeing the blue SamKnows screen.
No. Okay, let me stop sharing. Pardon?
Maybe try dropping out full screen.
Yes, I will. Let me just try resharing.
There we are.
Perfect. I'm going to try play one more time and see if this works.
Thank you. I'd just like to let everybody know we did test all this beforehand.
Yes, we did. It's classic.
Yes, we're getting the second slide now. Thank you.
Perfect. So yes, I'd like to start by giving an introduction to SamKnows and who we are, as I mentioned. So we have been working in the internet performance measurement space for over 10 years now. Our first client was actually Ofcom, the UK regulator. They were looking for a hardware-based testing solution and came across a pilot study actually that Sam and our other two founders have released in 2008. They were looking to run a hardware-based test using hardware as a methodology and hadn't actually been able to find anyone who had something like this to run. They saw our study, invited us in to have a chat, and we actually incorporated the company in order to respond to that tender. And I guess the rest is history. We've really been working with Ofcom ever since, expanding that project far beyond the white box testing that we started out with. We include mobile broadband testing for Ofcom. We've looked at fixed wireless. We have web-based tests, and we also use the SamKnows methodology as a basis for audit data to be submitted by the ISPs to the regulator. So it's been a very long-standing project for us. And obviously, since our work with Ofcom, we've kind of gone on to work with regulators across the world, including the CRTC in Canada, FCC in the US, Anatel in Brazil, obviously the ACCC, ComCom in New Zealand, Ofca in Hong Kong, many in the EU, and the CITC in Saudi as well. So it's been a busy 10 years. We're 100% independent as well, so we're not affiliated with any groups or any industry. And I think our unbiased approach to measurement is really one of the reasons that our data is trusted by governments and RSPs worldwide. The measurement platform is also completely global, so we work with ISPs and regulators around the world, as you can see on the map there. And it really is quite interesting because each stakeholder has their own goals and requirements for each project that we work on. Regulators are normally interested in promoting competition, directing investment into infrastructure, benchmarking, auditing ISP performance. In certain markets, for example in Brazil, if RSPs don't hit specific indicators, then they're actually fined quite a lot, and our data is used in order to sort of police that. But we also see it being used as an educational piece as well. So ensuring that consumers have the information they need to make decisions on what broadband plan might be best for them, depending on how they use their internet. ISPs are slightly different, or RSPs I should say. They tend to use our data to help troubleshoot issues internally, diagnose network faults, or help solve customer complaints. But working in these different markets really means we have a broad understanding of the types of challenges facing both RSPs and regulators. And I think these parallels help us suggest solutions based on past experience that we've had. Our SDKs are very mature. So we have a hardware SDK, mobile SDK, and web-based SDK that power all of the test agents that we run. Over the 10 years we've been in business, there's always been an enormous focus on R&D internally. The internet is obviously dynamic, and the way people interact with products and applications changes. As speeds have increased over the years, consumers have been able to use their connectivity differently. So for example, streaming TV shows and movies using popular applications. That's something that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. Our team is constantly working to innovate to either predict or react to these changes. and building new features or writing new tests to ensure that the data that we're collecting is as dynamic as what we're looking to measure. We'll touch on all of the different types of tests that we have available later on in the presentation, so you can see kind of the spectrum of what's available. And lastly, we collect a lot of data, billions of rows in fact. Our flexible and intuitive analytics portal really allows for complex performance data to be quickly analysed in a variety of ways, and it just means it's a lot easier to make sense of the data that is available. The Measuring Broadband Australia programme has evolved over the 3 years it's been running. Sean kind of touched on why this project came into existence. We see there have been sort of 3 distinct phases as we've moved through. The initial phase, as Sean touched on, was to kind of assess whether there was an information gap that needed to be filled. Was it worth running a project at all? Was this something that was needed in Australia? Part of the review was to see what was currently available in the market on broadband performance. And the pilot study that we ran kind of gave the conclusion that this was something that needed to be put in place. And from that, we moved into phase 2 of the project. And phase 2 was really collecting that data and setting up an Australian measurement platform in order to fill that information gap. And that was via sending white boxes out to Australian citizens and collecting test data and then publishing reports to track performance for the main RSPs and NBN plans. And then this would obviously allow actionable data to be collected by the regulator, the ACCC, to help achieve the aims that they were looking to include. So improved competition, encouraging investment to promote the interests of end users, and other things. Phase 3, I think, is the stage of the project that we're moving towards now. And for us, that means making the platform even more dynamic. So currently we release reports on a quarterly basis. And as Sean mentioned, we're up to the 9th at the moment. And those reports involve a lot of work to review and assess the data as we release them. We're very keen and are looking at the moment to move to a more real-time system where we can generate reports much more quickly. The way to make this transition done is really by identifying anomalies in real time. And this isn't something that can be done by human beings. This kind of thing needs to be done with AI. As I said, we have an enormous amount of data coming in, billions and billions of rows, and it's not something that you can go through with a human eye and be able to sort of see where issues might arise. So we have a prototype called Alpha. Alpha automatically learns trends by looking at actual performance in a particular country or on a particular network. It looks at the network topology and how the different metadata that we have for each white box or test agent is related. So there's a huge amount of active data that we collect. Active data is tests such as download or upload results, so actual measurement results from the different tests that we have, but also a lot of passive data, so environmental data or metadata that we collect alongside every active result. This is all collected by the platform. The SamKnows platform is running 24/7. The white boxes will run tests every day, whether you're awake or asleep, as long as you're not using your internet connection. And all of this data is fed through into Alpha, our AI tool. And what Alpha does is learn what expected behavior is for that particular region or network. And then when there is a deviation from the normal expected behavior, either a good or a bad deviation, this is then sent as a very clear notification that outlines what the deviation was, how much it's moved away from expected performance, and tries to narrow down a sort of a correlation analysis of where the issue might be coming from. And this really moves us into the realm of not just measuring networks and providing kind of reports to benchmark, but also monitoring networks as well in real time to try and identify issues as and when they arise. So it's quite an exciting project for us. It's one that we hope to kind of talk more about a little bit later. As I said, it's a prototype at the moment. It's something that Sam and his team have created as part of our R&D that we're running. You can see briefly on this slide new features and new tests that have been released as part of the program as well. You know, as we've evolved and kind of had the white boxes collecting data, and been speaking with the ACCC team, there's always more things that are interesting for us to investigate or try and report on. And we've added lots of different tests over the time that we've had the project running, from outages to video streaming to video conferencing. When we were, obviously when COVID hit, everyone kind of switched to working from home, and there was a much bigger importance on video streaming and being able to, video conferencing and being able to access that via your residential broadband connection. So there's lots of new things that are always coming out of the project itself. Sam's going to talk a little bit more about the platform itself, how this works, how it's set up, and what tests we actually run, to give a little bit more depth into the technical background behind a SamKnows project. So Sam, if you're there, I will hand over to you for the next part.
Sure, go ahead. Thank you. You can hear me okay, Roxanne?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Okay, super. So yes, thanks again everyone for inviting us to talk. So I have a few slides now talking a bit about how the SamKnows platform works. And this is quite generic. This is not geared specifically towards Australia at the moment. This is more generic as to how we work globally. And then I'll bring it back to Australia shortly. So our focus as a company is on end-to-end broadband performance measurements. And what we mean by end-to-end is carrying out measurements from the point of connectivity inside the user's home out to various points on the internet. Now, this might be to dedicated test servers. So we have test servers hosted at a number of internet exchange points in Australia. We have, I'll just mention this briefly actually now, we have test servers located in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth, and I think those are the 4 cities we have them, each with a large amount of connectivity. But only some of our tests can run to these dedicated test servers. We also have measurements which run to real services, and I'll talk a lot more about this on a slide just shortly. But examples of real services out on the internet would be things like Netflix, YouTube, websites, Zoom, for example, that we're talking on right now, and many more. But some ISP or some RSPs, as the RSPs on the call will know, will deploy some of these services partially inside their network as well. So, for example, with Google, with YouTube, they offer the Google Global Caches, and Facebook have a similar thing with Facebook Network Appliances. Netflix have their own version with Open Connect appliances, and these are basically caches which can be deployed inside the RSP networks. So our tests are cognizant of these as well, and we'll make use of them. So it's really not as simple as we run a measurement from A to B. It's more like A to BC through Z. It tests to many different locations. And just to back it up for a second, the whole founding principle of why we started doing what we're doing is that we felt there wasn't enough transparency in broadband performance claims, and this is going back more than 10 years ago here. And we figured the only way to do this reliably would actually be to do this from a piece of hardware sitting inside a user's home. And I'll talk more on the benefits of doing hardware versus software on the next slide in just a minute. But the last thing to mention here is that we've also started carrying out measurements back inside the home, as depicted on the left-hand side of this chart here. So these measurements carried out back inside the home, they're predominantly looking more at environmental data, like things like what signal strength for various connected wireless devices, whether devices are seeing variable pings inside the home, how much data is being transferred, all these kinds of things. This certainly isn't live on the Measuring Broadband Australia project yet, but this is some of the things we're starting to look at elsewhere in the world. So if we move on, please. Okay, so I mentioned about hardware. So we have this piece of hardware that we give away to consumers all around the world for free, and there's thousands of users in Australia who have one of these, and we call this piece of hardware the white box. Now, really, this looks like a small Ethernet router, and it is, under the hood, a small Ethernet router, but it's not running as a router. It's really running as a client device. You can think of it as a managed switch, but with effectively a small Linux machine attached to it internally. And its sole purpose is for carrying out measurements. It can carry out measurements at up to 1 gigabit per second bidirectional. And when I say 1 gigabit per second, I mean we can actually saturate 1 gig over TCP, which is quite important. I'll also add that we have 2.5 gigabit and 10 gigabit white boxes available as well, but they are, frankly, the cost of the components is so much higher at the moment. The 1 gigabit one is the most, this device you see here on the screen is the most affordable and widely deployed device we have for these kinds of regulatory measurements. So you might ask, why do we bother deploying this hardware device inside users' homes to carry these measurements? Why don't we just send out a piece of software and they can install it on their laptops or phones or computers or whatever? And well, the reason is simply this. It's only with a hardware device can we accurately detect the presence of cross-traffic inside the user's homes. That's one reason. And by cross-traffic, I mean background activity from other devices in the home. So imagine, for example, we went down the software route and we sent you a piece of software to install on your home computer, which would carry out measurements once an hour, for example. Now, this piece of software will happily carry out measurements from your computer, but it won't be able to tell if your son or daughter is upstairs watching Netflix on their computer at the same time, on a separate computer. And what this means is that the measurements from your computer would be impaired by the bandwidth usage from other traffic inside the home, from the Netflix traffic in that scenario. So the white box is able to detect the presence of all of this traffic. It has multiple Ethernet ports on the back, which users are instructed to connect their wired devices via, and it also has wireless interfaces inside it. And these wireless interfaces will passively monitor wireless traffic in the vicinity and will not carry out measurements when there is activity. And the last thing to mention, as Roxanne alluded to earlier, is that these devices are completely autonomous. Although users can actually have some interaction with them, they can trigger their own measurements. The primary mode of operation of these devices is entirely autonomous. They will carry out these measurements automatically according to a predefined test schedule. This typically is usually running measurements once an hour, but it really varies depending on the part of the world we're operating in, what the bandwidth usage caps are, and the goals of the regulator in question. For example, some of our regulatory customers focus very heavily on peak hour measurements and really don't care about off-peak. So we run almost all of our measurements during peak hour rather than off-peak. And some of our regulatory customers only care about download speed. So we don't run our Netflix or YouTube measurements, for example. You get the idea. Anyway, so on the next slide, if we move on to that, we'll talk about all of the different measurements we support. I'm not going to, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these. There's so many of them, but the important point to get across is that we have a wide blend of both quality of service measurements and quality of experience measurements. All of these are active measurements, and by that, and this is really important, when we say active measurements, what that means is we're generating, we're synthetically generating traffic, let's say to a speed test server, for example, and we're measuring the response. The alternative to that is passive measurements, and that means we don't generate any traffic, we just watch users' activity and we infer performance based upon the traffic that we're seeing from them. There's definitely pros and cons to both approaches. We absolutely are firmly set down the path of active measurements because it gives us, for all of the obvious reasons you can imagine, it gives us a robust sample size, which is very predictable, whereas with passive measurements, when users' computers are turned off, you don't get anything, of course. And also, it means we don't have to deal with some very thorny privacy topics. We don't want to be accused of snooping on users' traffic. That's it's absolutely no interest to us. So we run all of our own measurements separately. So just very briefly on some of these measurements, like I said, some of them will run to dedicated test servers, of which we have many dotted around Australia. And some of them run, or most of the ones listed here, run out to the real content providers. Some of these we work very closely with, like Netflix, and some of them less closely with. So for example, with Netflix, they built us an API into their back end. And this API, when we access it, will steer us towards the nearest Netflix Open Connect appliance and will allow us to stream video content from that Netflix appliance without the customer needing a Netflix account effectively. So we can carry out these measurements even when the customer doesn't have an account on these services. But I'll talk more about that later on. And if anyone has any questions about these measurements, please feel free to ask in the Q&A later on. So let's move on, please. Okay, so as Roxanne mentioned, we do these measurements all over the world. We have two classes of customers, really. We have the regulatory classes of customers, such as the ACCC here in Australia. We also have RSPs as customers, and frankly, the RSPs tend to be the more demanding ones in terms of volumes and requirements. Some of these RSPs have installed our measurements inside their existing CPEs or their existing home routers. And where this occurs, we can be gathering, our measurements can be running on millions of devices simultaneously in one country on one RSP's network. So as Roxanne says, we collect a few billion measurement results every single day. And this is our data pipeline internally has had to evolve quite dramatically over the past 10 years to cope with this increasing demand. In the early days with SamKnows, we had maybe a couple of hundred devices out there, and we were collecting a few thousand results a day. Now we're into many billions. So this schematic on the screen here really depicts the flow or the latest evolution of our data pipeline, how we get measurement data from our test agents, which is the kind of off orange color you see off to the left. And test agents is what we generically call anything of ours which can generate measurements. So white boxes, routers, our mobile apps. And then they are submitting their measurement data into our pipeline, which is the big section in the middle. And we make use of a lot of open source tools and technologies here at SamKnows. So for example, we use Apache Flume and Apache Kafka for our data ingestion and streaming mechanisms. And Flume is particularly useful because it's very, very tolerant to failure. And whilst not a lot on our core will fail, we have to be cognizant that we're receiving measurements from millions of devices all around the world. And sometimes these will be on very good connections, and sometimes they'll be on very bad connections. So we have to be able to buffer data in our pipeline and tolerate failure because we really don't want to lose measurement data. So data is fed from Flume into Kafka, and then we make use of Google BigQuery. We have recently, until fairly recently, we hosted our own quite large Hadoop cluster for storing all of our measurement data, but we've really outgrown that in terms of both scale of data and in terms of operations. We've recently switched over to Google BigQuery and seen both big performance improvements, cost savings, and operational improvements as well. And anyway, and then all of our applications on the right-hand side will access our metadata store, which is based around MySQL, and our measurement store, which is based on Google BigQuery. For those interested in this kind of stuff, you might, and this is a common interview question from me when I'm interviewing people, is you might, why do we have two different types of databases here? Why do we have Google BigQuery and MySQL? And the answer is, frankly, that some databases are really, really good for small transactional operations like inserts and updates and deletes and so on. And that's what a MySQL is useful for here, for accounts and metadata effectively, while they aren't very good at storing extremely large volumes of data. And that is precisely what Google BigQuery is good for. So we have a bit of a split database architecture. Okay, if we just move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Measuring Broadband Australia program insights. So, like I mentioned earlier, we gather these we're continuously collecting these measurements. So we're running measurements typically hourly, sometimes less than hourly. So I think in Australia we focus our speed tests during peak hours, but we certainly still run measurements off peak as well to give us a baseline against off peak hours. So all of these continual measurements allow us to see a time of day profile for speed, and ultimately this allows us to benchmark the ISPs against their advertising speed claims. Or sorry, the RSPs against their advertising speed claims. I'm sure you've all seen the RSPs advertising up on billboards. I certainly have when I visited Australia, and one of the key outputs of the MBA program is that this provides a public way of verifying these. We also have outage measurements. Now, I'm going to talk a bit more about this later on, but this is seeking to basically look for when a customer loses access to their internet connection entirely. This is certainly one of the key complaints that's come out of we've heard around connections in Australia, that there's quite a few outages. So this metric was introduced fairly early on to explore that. We've had some interesting findings over the years, so I'd encourage you to read back over historical reports around that. So moving on, we're also, because we're capturing measurements across a wide variety of access technologies, this allows us to show these in the reports. So we currently benchmark ADSL, FTTC, FTTP, and I think we've just started looking at fixed wireless as well. So we break these out in the reports as well. And then one more here, we compare against the major states in Australia as well. And lastly, I've mentioned applications. We've fairly early on in the report series from Measuring Broadband Australia, started introducing other applications such as video conferencing and streaming. Okay, can we move on, please? Okay. So let's talk a bit more about these RSPs advertising. So we have, as I mentioned, we have these measurements running continuously, which allows us to capture a time of day measurement and see how performance varies over time. Now, what we do in most countries is have a look, we categorize peak versus off-peak hour performance. In most countries, peak hours is 7 to 11 p.m. and that is indeed the same local time rather, because Australia has multiple time zones, and that is the same as we use in Australia here. However, one thing we noticed, or one thing the ACCC noticed fairly early on, is that looking at the busy hours, as it's called there, rather than peak hours, looking at the busy hours alone wasn't really enough to characterize the true impact of when congestion started to hit. So what was introduced, I think in report 3 or 4, was a look at what's called the busiest hour, and this is effectively the I mean, if you divide 7 to 11 p.m. up over 30-day period of a month, you end up with 120 busy hours. We take the 5th worst hour of that of those busy hours, and we call that the busiest hour. And this is an attempt to look at for the for the worst possible, or the fifth worst possible performance that that users would experience. And this has been quite revealing. So it's quite interesting to look back through the reports and compare busy hours versus the busiest hours. That's a mouthful. You can sometimes see there's definitely been an improvement in that over the past number of reports. But yeah, the key thing here is to benchmark the RSP's advertised claims against the actual achieved measurement claims. Okay, if we move on. Great. So one topic which often comes up in countries like in Australia, it's the same in the UK, where you have this split wholesale and retail market. So here in the UK, we have an organisation called Openreach, which span out from BT or British Telecom. And they obviously you have the NBN, which is a not wholly dissimilar situation. Now, what often ends up happening in these markets is that Party A blames Party B, and Party B blames Party A for any underperformance. And of course, we're going to because we as in SamKnows, because we're carrying out end-to-end measurements. If we're just simply carrying out measurements over the top, across the RSP network, across the wholesale network, then we're going to see basically the worst case. We can't, if we're just carrying out end-to-end measurements, we can't determine just from those measurements alone who, if anyone, is at fault. So what we introduced a couple of years ago was an attempt to disentangle this, or to distinguish physically impaired services from underperforming services. And the way this works is that we class a service as underperforming if no more than 5% of its speed tests achieved more than 75% of the product's speed. And so basically you can think of this as we're excluding, we can exclude connections which just are always bad or have no chance of being good. And then that is effectively eliminating connections from the charts, which obviously have some physical impairment, and thus gives a fairer basis to compare the RSPs against one another without biasing against ones which just have a higher proportion of impaired physical connections. Okay. And I said I'll talk a bit more about outages. So, like I said, this is one of the common tropes or common complaints that we've heard from users in Australia. So we have this measurement. We have a UDP-based latency and packet loss measurement, which runs continuously on our white boxes. It sends around about 2,500 packets every single hour. Because this is sending such a high volume of packets, it's roughly a packet every 1.5 seconds. We, about 7 or 8 years ago, realized we could actually use this high volume of packets to also detect when the user was losing connectivity entirely. This is how we track outages. We're basically looking for 2 or more consecutive packets being lost to our destination measurement servers. Now, of course, 2 single packets being lost over a course of 2.5 seconds probably doesn't really constitute an outage. It could just simply be some rerouting taking place, and the routes haven't reconverged yet. But so we up this threshold to 30 seconds. So we say we need a period of 30 seconds of contiguous packet loss, which we'll then define as an outage. And obviously, if a user has 30 seconds of basically complete lack of connectivity to their home, that's something, if they're actively trying to use their connection, they're going to start notice it. So we report on the number, or the average number of outages, and we bucket them by duration of the outages as well. So 30 to 60 seconds, 1 to a few minutes, and then 10 minutes plus. Obviously, the shorter ones are more common with things like modems rebooting and resyncing, things like this. But the longer term ones do occur as well when there is a longer term physical issue or some maintenance work taking place. Okay. So I mentioned I'll talk a bit more about video streaming. So we have we as SamKnows support a wide variety of video measurements. We have YouTube, Netflix, BBC iPlayer here in the UK. We're looking at some more country-specific ones, possibly including Australia as well. We're working on Amazon Prime as well at the moment, and Hulu. But I'm going to focus on Netflix here, as that's what we focus on in the Measuring Broadband Australia report. Now, to be really clear, what we are actually doing with all of these video tests is we're not just running a simple download test. We are actually streaming video content from these content providers, and we are parsing the video frames as well. And we're looking to see. We start off at the highest bit rate, so let's say Ultra HD content for Netflix and YouTube. Start off at the highest bit rate, and we try and stream that video and make sure we can keep up with our broadband connection can consume video frames fast enough to keep up with real-time playback. And we do this by looking at the timestamps inside the video frames themselves. So we're not actually doing full video decoding because our poor little underpowered white box doesn't have a hardware video decoder, and it would really struggle with 4K video. But it turns out we don't need to actually decode the video. We just look at the video frames, the containers around them, and look at the timestamps within them. And this basically lets us work out, can our connection keep up with Ultra HD? If it can't, then we step down to HD video or full HD video, and then we try again, and we keep going. And when we eventually find a video quality that we can stream reliably, that's what we call our bitrate reliably streamed. And this then is, these results then manifest themselves in our regulatory reports in a number of ways. Some of our customers choose to report on what is the ratio of Ultra HD to SD videos that a given RSP or access technology can stream reliably. And in some markets where the access speeds are much higher, they choose to report on how many streams can, or what percentage of connections can simultaneously stream X or more parallel HD streams. And that's what we do in Australia with the MBA program. We look at how many, what percentage of connections can support 2 or more HD or better streams. It's a mouthful, that metric, but it is quite an interesting, quite a telling metric. Okay, and Roxanne, do you mind if I hand back to you to talk about the report timeline?
Yeah, of course. So this is just to kind of give a view on the reports. We've spoken about it briefly, and Sean touched on it as well. As I mentioned, we're up to the 9th report at the moment. Report 10 is due out soon. And then we have obviously additional reports that are due to come out throughout the rest of this year and then into next, where hopefully we'll continue to explore new metrics or new ways of looking at data after discussions with the ACCC. And then I think that brings us to the Q&A.
Oh, thank you, Roxanne. That's just fascinating stuff, actually. We do have some questions. Let me just switch the screens around so that we can get to those. I did have one, if I could get back to it. We've got a bunch of questions come through, actually. And that was about the collection architecture that you have, but I think you may have actually answered it, Sam, throughout the course of the presentation. So the way you collect your the data from the collectors, does that, what is the architecture like within Australia? Does it all go to the one set of servers in one place, or is it distributed across like a massive Google type architecture infrastructure, or how does that work?
Cool. Well, we're no Google. We're much smaller than Google. So it's I guess one thing I perhaps didn't make clear on the architecture diagram earlier is it's a split architecture. Our measurement infrastructure is very separate to our data collection pipeline infrastructure. So our measurement infrastructure is very globally distributed. We have test servers in, I don't know how many countries, but we have around about 1,000 test servers, including some in Australia. Our data collection infrastructure is more centralized. It's not centralized, but it's more centralized. We have regions in Europe and in North America, well, Canada. We use those two locations for all of our data collection. So measurements from Australia will be sent to our European cluster, which then is stored in Google BigQuery in Europe. We have geographic load balancing and failover. So if Europe goes down, for any reason, we'll fail over all of the traffic to Canada and vice versa. But normally, measurements from the Americas will go to Canada, whereas measurements from everywhere else will go to Europe. But it's like on the data privacy side of things, it's important to note that we're not collecting information about what users are doing on their broadband connections, or we won't have almost no personally identifiable information whatsoever. The measurements we're collecting are literally just broadband connection 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one's assigned a unique integer identifier. Achieved a download speed of X, again speed test server Y at this particular timestamp, and that's pretty much the extent of the type of data we're collecting.
Yeah,
there's multiple. Sorry, I'll just say there's multiple. There are multiple layers in there whereby where it can be tolerant of failure. So what we really don't want to do is we don't want to lose measurements. We don't particularly care if they're late or delayed. It doesn't matter to us if they arrive an hour later than normal. But what we don't want to do is lose measurement data.
So the measurements are all buffered in the original SamKnows white boxes and then pumped up to your aggregation system somewhere else. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
I mean it's when there's no problems.
Yeah,
when there's no problems, there's no buffering. Okay. It's all just straight through. But say for example, take for example the outages situation. By definition, our outage measurements will always be buffered because they can't report a measurement to us when there is an outage. So in that case, the white box itself buffers the measurements, and when the internet connection returns, it flushes that buffer and transmits it up to our edge data collection servers. Data collection servers.
I assume it streams that, it trickles that data in so that it doesn't impede the flow of traffic itself. Because there might be a bit of a queue there.
Yeah, I mean the volume. No, the volume of data that we actually submit is tiny. So, for example, for a speed test measurement, a single speed test measurement will probably generate about I don't know.
Well, it's just bytes, a single number, isn't it?
60 bytes. Oh no, it's not a single number. There's
and a time.
I'm oversimplifying it, right? There's a device identifier, there's a test identifier, there's a timestamp. There's the transfer speed, there's the server, there's the IP address, there's whether it's over v4 or v6. We also have the concept in the speed test of warm-ups. So we allow a ramp up of speed, and we're basically looking at the TCP
slow start. Yeah.
TCP, yes, exactly. We're trying to counteract slow starts. So we're recording timestamps and transfer times for all of those as well. But in all, it's probably around 60 bytes of data that we transfer up to our data ingestion servers.
Okay, so hang on, I better sort of get us back onto schedule here and ask the questions that have come through. But because actually it was pointed out by one of my board members recently that some of this measurement stuff, well, it was pointed out to me actually after I wanted to deploy some measurement infrastructure, that Narelle, this stuff's like crack. Once you get onto it, it's very hard to get off. So the statistics and measurement ability, I think, is just a really fascinating topic. We've had a question here from one of our members here saying, as the white box will not run tests whilst the line is in use, what percentage of busy hour or peak tests are skipped? And how has this changed during COVID? Given we've all seen such a big increase in utilisation, I think he's pointing at that. So if you're not...
That's a very good question, actually. So yeah, it's a common question we get when we're talking about the gross traffic detection approach. And let me just explain in a little more detail what the cross traffic detection approach does, and I'll answer the question specifically. So basically, before every test every test is due to execute according to a schedule. So a download speed test might be due to run at 1 minute and 20 seconds past every hour. Before that test is due to, and by the way, no tests execute in parallel, of course, they're all in series. So we aren't executing a download test at the same time as an upload test, that would be madness. But before any test is due to execute, we watch for cross traffic. So for the preceding 30 seconds, we're looking at how much cross traffic can we detect from wired and wireless clients. And if for any 5-second period in that 30-second window, cross traffic exceeds our thresholds, then we defer the test. And when I say defer, what that means is we wait another 30 seconds and we repeat the same process. And we keep going and going and going until eventually we hit 5 minutes. And if we hit 5 minutes of deferrals without being able to run the test, then we abandon it altogether. So we do actually give it a number of chances to retry. And certainly it's not as bad as you might think as to how much drop-off there is. And I kind of attribute that to lots of people are watching, I imagine, lots of people, I know some people on the call will know much better than me, lots of people are watching things like Netflix and YouTube in the evening, and we've all seen the headlines around how much bandwidth they consume. But you'll probably also know that they're actually very bursty in their bandwidth. They're not constantly streaming. If you're watching a 15 meg Ultra HD video from Netflix, it's not a constant 15 meg stream. It's actually big bursts every 3 to 4 minutes as Netflix fills its buffers for a few minutes, and then it goes completely silent. And it does that to basically smooth out any problems in internet connectivity by itself. So this deferral process we have will often actually give us time to slot between these bursts. But anyway, to answer the specific question, normally we see sometime during peak hours, so let's say 7 to 11 p.m. in normal times, we see it between a 12 to 15% drop off in sample size, so number of measurements collected, and that's during peak hours. During COVID, we haven't actually seen that peak hour. We haven't actually seen that figure change much during peak hours. It's maybe increased by a couple of percent, but really no real difference. What we have seen is significant change in off-peak, or what we traditionally call off-peak. So now we see basically that peak period, that 7 to 11 p.m., broadening out to really encompass the entire working day, really. So now I know it starts at 9 a.m. and runs all the way through to the evening hours. Oh, well, here we go.
Sean, I've just shared one of our graphs, and if you can see what's happened over the last few days here, even this big fat curve we've got during the day, whereas it used to be quite a steep one coming straight up to the peak in the evening. That's really what we've seen happen.
Yeah, and we basically see the same effect of, we see the effect of that from the other side. So it's we've seen an increase, or basically a drop in samples during daytime hours. Not as extreme as peak, so it's still less than 10%, but it's more than it was back in February.
That corresponds with what we've seen. Okay, so there's still a couple more questions, and I do need to mention to everybody whoever can stay on till the end, we do have 3 lucky door prizes to give away at the end, and I know these lucky door prizes were really appreciated in previous times. So if you can make it to the end of the Q&A, folks, you might be one of the people who get it. So one of the other questions I've got here is, how many users have we got, how many white boxes have we got deployed out within Australia today, or effectively how many user measurements are being taken? I don't know if you mentioned that, I'm sorry if I missed it. Can you say, or can Sean say? How many have we got out there in Australia? How many active measurements?
I can say, but Sean, do you want to, or Roxanne?
No, you go, Sam. Look, it's my numbers are probably a few weeks out of date.
Oh, well, they're probably, okay. Embarrassingly, I don't have the live number in front of me at the moment, but if you give me a second, I can
Because
tell
I remember there were about 8,000 people signed up for it originally, way back when I was watching these things avidly.
Yes. So there's obviously fewer signs. It's around about 1,500 are on and collecting measurements at any one time. There is obviously peaks and troughs in that, but it's pretty stable at around about 1,500 devices at the moment.
Okay. Another question we've got through was just wondering if there's a pipeline of reports on application performance for Australia you can share any details of. And if so, have the ACCC or SamKnows made any changes in process since the critical services report on video conferencing? Oh yes, I want to hear that one. Should I repeat the question? Is there a pipeline of reports on application performance for Australia you can share any details of? And are the ACCC or SamKnows making any changes in the process since the critical services report on video conferencing? Because I remember the video conferencing one did come out, and I know at the time I was actually lecturing at one of the unis, and my lecturing Zooms were great. So I was surprised to see the data come through then.
Yeah, so Sean, do you want to talk to this one, or do you want me to talk to it?
Look, I'll just start and say that yes, there is an additional report and maybe 2 reports to come along the same lines as the critical services report. The timing, we've been waiting, very much wanting to see when we release the next report, if it could show the differences as the application level restrictions are lifted by government. So at the moment, or periodically, there have been some approaches made to application service providers if they could restrict their picture quality to standard definition, and that's been put on a rolling basis. At the moment, we think that we're transitioning away from that. That's the report back from the industry special working group. So we think now is we're probably getting at a good time where we can start collating the data to capture that and provide the next report. And yes, I am aware there have been a range of further engagements with the application service providers, but Sam and Roxanne, I think you've led those engagements and can probably give a sense of that to the extent you can without disclosing anything that you think is confidential.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll just jump in here. This is Roxanne. So we have been talking to the video conferencing providers. So the original test that we ran. Oh, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. So yes, we have been working with the video conferencing providers. The initial test that we ran looked at the free accounts or free services that video conferencing providers provide. So one of the things we're looking to expand the testing into is to measure the paid for services that video conferencing service offer as well. It actually, as part of our testing and the work that we've been doing, certain providers have different experiences, as you can imagine, if you have a free account versus a paid for account. So it's that kind of distinction that we want to embellish on in the next reports that we're looking to include in, just trying to see how that will affect performance for people. And it's kind of worth saying here that they're obviously the tests that we have at the moment, we put together. Obviously, coronavirus kind of swept around the world in March and everyone suddenly started working from home. And I know the words unprecedented have been used probably millions of times by now, but it was a very unprecedented situation. And as we all switched to working from home and using these providers, we obviously saw a need to try and be able to test video conferencing services to see how they were holding up. The test itself that we created was a latency test. One of the things we're also looking to build on is expanding this test to measure other parts of the experience of video conferencing. Obviously, latency is one part of this, but there are other factors that will affect the experience somebody would have using a video conferencing provider or provided service. So I think what we would like to do is also expand the test, and we're working with the R&D team in SamKnows as well to bring other metrics online that kind of look at other factors there as well.
Well, that makes perfect sense, Roxanne, that if you were looking at the free services as opposed to the paid for ones. And yeah, I mean, in some senses you do get what you paid for, but indeed, I know from so many of my relatives and so forth that they were getting a lot out of these free video conferencing systems just to keep in touch when everybody was just locked down at home. And as I know, Sean probably is now, being in Melbourne as he is. Okay, can I just put in another call for any further questions? Do people have any further questions? Because I think the other question I had down here was about the sort of more or less the Heisenberg effect, that, you know, the instant you take a measurement, you actually affect the value of the measurement. But I think Sam answered that one earlier on to say that they look at traffic going by and infer the results of that. Although I'm not entirely sure how you do that, but that's I think a much more detailed conversation that I think Sam and I perhaps should have it offline. Does anybody else have any further questions that they'd like to put through to our speakers? I'll just give you a few moments to type them into the Q&A or the chat. I'm not seeing any others come through on our internal channels. So if anybody got any questions, last call for questions, folks, before we move to the thank yous. I'm not seeing any further questions. Okay, then I should just flick across then to the official thank yous while I change screen. So yes, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Sean. It's really great to hear directly from our regulator like this, and thank you for the overview of the regulator services that you gave us. Sam and Roxanne, it's great to have had you in from the UK. It's, you know, we really do appreciate bringing in the expertise from around the world that we can this time. That's been one of the fun sides of everybody adopting video conferencing holus bolus, that we're now more comfortable with bringing people in from around the world at the drop of a hat. And I really do appreciate, it was more than just the drop of a hat. I appreciate so much that you're spending the time with us today. It's just been great. Once again, I'll remind everybody that upcoming, we've got our AGM scheduled for the 27th of October. We've got 2 time zones up there, so pick which part of Australia you're in. Western time, it's 1:30 p.m. in Perth, or we'll be on daylight saving in the East Coast by then, so it'll be 4:30 p.m. that we kick off, and we'll have Yari Arko speaking, the former IETF Internet Engineering Task Force Chair and member of the Internet Architecture Board. He's actually quite the IoT fan, so it apparently communicates with his laundry via Facebook. So, and I mean directly via, like, it's not his dirty washing on Facebook, his dirty linen, it's actually connecting to his washing machine. And in November, we'll be having our anniversary celebration. So we're going to move across to social time, which means I'll have to ask Nick to end the Facebook stream. So thank you everybody on Facebook for tuning into us. I need to say goodbye to you now. Nick, over in technical land, please turn them off. And then if you could just wave at me or something so that I know that they've all gone. And then I'll mention who it is we've got to give the lucky door prize to. And once I've mentioned that, we will, okay, so bye-bye to everybody on Facebook. We're no longer streaming live, it's just internally. And for those registered attendees via Zoom. So the lucky door prize winners are Ian Manners, who is at Comcal. So Ian Manners, you have won yourself a microtik. Alex Lee from Vodafone, you also have won yourself a microtik. And Pavel Mrugalski, or Paul Mrugalski from Cyphertel, you have won a microtik. So we shall be in touch with Ian, Alex and Pavel not long after the evening tonight, and make arrangements to send those to you. So if I could call upon my staff to actually promote those other folks who are still here with us. It's now social time. We've still got 35 odd participants, or they're all being promoted. So if you could promote them all to webinar attendees, and we could just chat amongst ourselves. Hopefully those of you, while you're waiting, might want to go and get yourself a beverage of your choice to enjoy. I have some water here. I might actually switch to something, given it is the evening. So those poor folks in mourning over in the UK will either have to expose yourselves as enjoying a, what is it, a mimosa one has at this time of the day?
Exactly, that's acceptable. I'll take it on a Tuesday.
Yeah, well, if you'll excuse me, I am going to get myself a beverage from one of our well-known providers within this country, and perhaps I'll have to see if is my chair here yet, or my, can I hand over to one of my board members to be host for just a minute while I get myself a beverage? Oh, Matt, you're a board member.
Am I? And he's more social than I am.
Oh, thank you,
I'll go with that far.
Please host while I get myself a glass.
I was going to say, you're actually able to go outside and enjoy the sunshine, Brett. You'll be more social than me in Melbourne. I'll have to leave my house.
Nice background as always. Good.
What have I got set at the moment?
TIE fighter.
Ah, yes. Yes, well, it's become a bit of a theme when I'm going to my scout meetings to change the background and see what it's going to be next.
Well, if you got the ball, I'll go pour myself a beverage.
Well, you just got to go behind. It's very convenient for you. But that was quite interesting, learning about all the different monitoring and stuff that's been going on for the ACCC. I certainly learned quite a few things. I didn't quite realise the level of the way you guys were testing. I thought that was pretty cool. Anybody else have any comments about that?
Out of interest, how did you think we were testing?
Well, I luckily I'm a small provider, so I don't actually get tested, or at least I don't get reported against. I don't know. I thought, when I thought about it and sat down thought about it, what you guys are doing, especially the fact that you're doing Netflix and the way you're doing it, and the fact you're going to the point of finding the local cache and actually looking at the video frames, I thought the level of detail that you guys went to do that was quite enlightening, but it also gave me confidence in the results you're getting. Because I could see someone very easily doing as what you described, as just pulling it down and seeing what download rate it got. So it was quite pleasing to see you actually testing to that point, which also hopefully means you're testing to see for things like out-of-border packets, stuff like that, which over time would cause problems.
Well, people have always tried to game their ping times for SLA